مساء الخير، صباح الخير، وين ما كنتوا حسب التوقيت. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. توقفنا فترة ورجعنا. معكم الدكتورة أسماء الفضالة من دايركتور اوف ريسيرش من وايز في مؤسسة قطر. نرحب في اللقاء العاشر بالدكتور عبد العزيز زهري من المغرب من جامعة الحسن الأول. وطبعا الشكر للدكتور إبراهيم الحوطي على تسهيل وتنسيق هذه المحاضرات. طبعا هذا اللقاء العاشر وبيكون عندنا لقاءين إضافيين وبنوقف بإذن الله. عنوان المحاضرة دور النظرية في البحث العلمي. الستركتشر حق بالنسبة للبارتيسيبنتس الجداد عندنا ساعة كاملة، مقدمة بسيطة، وبعدين 20 دقيقة أو 25 الدكتور عبد العزيز بيعطينا برزنتيشن، وبعدين نترك مجال للمناقشة وللأسئلة. المحاضرة بتسجل ونشارككم فيها. لو مش حابين الصوت والصورة ممكن تستخدمون الشات سيكشن to share your ideas, reflections، وتعرفون بنفسكم والبلد اللي أنتوا فيها واللي تدرسون فيها. الدكتور عبد العزيز زهري عنده PhD في Education Science and Applied Linguistics، وعنده شهادة في European Coaching Certificate، وهو Associate Professor in Research Methods and English Communication من جامعة الحسن الأول. شكراً دكتور على دعم هذه اللقاءات الأسبوعية. تفضل بخصوص الموضوع اليوم، دور النظرية في البحث العلمي، ويليت تاخذون نوتس وتشاركون بأسئلتكم ومقترحاتكم في الشات سيكشن. بعد 20 دقيقة بنبدأ الأسئلة والأجوبة. شكراً. تفضل دكتور.
لا شكر على واجب أستاذة دكتورة أسماء، وشرف كل شرف لي الحضور معكم في هذا يعني اللقاء العلمي. إن شاء الله نستفيد ونفيد بإذن الله الحضور الكريم. أشكر الأستاذ إبراهيم الحوطي على يعني التنظيم ودقة التنظيم ما شاء الله. I will switch into English because this presentation is going to be in English. So again, I would like to first share my presentation before I start. I would like again just to thank Dr. Asmaa Al Fadala for these sessions, for these workshops. Interesting workshops. I have attended a few of them, and I guess that they are very, very interesting for researchers, whether they are doctoral, master students, or academic researchers, when it comes to learning about research and sharing ideas about how to do research. I hope everybody can hear me. If there is a problem with the sound, just mention it, please. So, as Dr. Asmaa has said, the title of today's session is The Role of Theory in Research, Grand versus Grounded Theory. We will start with these two quotes because they show how theory is important in research. And you know Henry Mintzberg, a lot of you know that Henry Mintzberg is an important scholar in management, research in management, with his theory on organizational structure. And he said that no generalizing beyond the data, no theory, no insight. And if no insights, why do research? That shows that the role of theory is very, very important because it provides us with insights. The second is of Albert one which can novice researchers and doctoral students, master students, to understand that the role of theory in research is central. Before I start explaining what theory is and how we can use it in research and why it is central, why the role of theory in research is central, I will share some tips with you that are very, very important, that are related, of course, to the use of theory in research and research in general. So the first tip, and it is a very, very important tip taken from a scholar and a guru of self-development, personal professional development, Stephen Covey, from his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says, okay, put first things first. In research, it is very, very important to put first things first. We'll see how later maybe. But in research, because research is a protocol, we are going to see this, it's a process, it is a procedure, we should follow the procedure to the letter. We cannot do research if we don't follow the protocol to the letter. So the most important thing in doing research is to put first things first. There are things we should follow, and we should not put the cart before the horse. Of course, even if a lot of people nowadays today in the 21st century say that it is very innovative to put the cart before the horse, but in research, you have to follow some steps. There are steps to follow. And if these steps are not followed, the research is going to be problematic and your research is not going to be appropriate. And I always like to share this with whether students or people I get in touch with when it comes to research. This is what we call the research onion, developed by Saunders et al. In 2009. And this research onion, I kind of advise all researchers, novice researchers and students, doctoral students or master students, to Google it and try to learn about it, because it shows them the main steps in research, from the research philosophy that you see here, to the research approaches, to the research strategies. And we have here grounded theory. Here we're going to talk about grounded theory today, and grand theory and grounded theory. And you have, of course, the choices, whether we are going to do mixed methods or multi-methods or mono methods or experimental research and so on and so forth. And we have, of course, research strategies before that. I talked about that. And then we have time horizons where we are going to do longitudinal research or cross-section research. And at the end, data collection and analysis. And these are related, of course. These elements here are related. And Saunders presented them in layers. That's why he called them the research onion, because of the layers. And each layer is pretty important for researchers to know and to understand. And if a researcher does not understand one of those layers, he will have, or she will have, problems, let's say, proceeding with the research that they are doing. The third tip is to ask the right questions. It is very important in research to ask the right questions. So the first question is, what type of reality are we studying, or am I studying? It is a very important question to ask. What type of reality am I studying? How am I going to approach this reality? What strategies am I going to use? What methods am I going to adopt? And within which time horizon am I going to study this issue? We've talked about it, whether you're going to do research longitudinally or cross-sectionally, and how are you going, or how am I going to collect, analyze, and interpret my data? And these are interesting and important questions that we should have in mind. As Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, everything depends on answering this problem. So the first 55 minutes of this hour, the first 55 minutes should be used in determining the proper questions to ask. And that's why it's very, very important to ask appropriate questions and ask important questions before embarking on research or before starting collecting your data. Now, what is theory? We said that theory, the role of theory is central, or theory is important in research. Actually, it is indispensable, whether we are going to do research from a grand theory perspective or from grounded theory perspective. The role of theory is very, very important. And defining theory is hugely important, because a lot of researchers, let's say new researchers or novice researchers, but even some experienced researchers sometimes have difficulty defining theory. So we're going to choose the definition of Kerlinger, because I find that it is easy and simple and to the point. In 1986, he defined theory as a set of interrelated constructs or concepts, definitions and propositions that present a systematic view of phenomena by specifying relations among variables with the purpose of explaining and predicting phenomena. So this explains to us what a theory is and what it does, of course. So a theory is a set of interrelated concepts or constructs. Because, of course, when you do research, the most important thing is to define your concepts and to define your constructs. That's why we say that it is a set of interrelated constructs. So a theory helps you, and we're going to come to this, define and determine what your constructs and what your concepts are. It helps you come up with definitions and propositions. So it helps you come up with propositions or assumptions or hypotheses, we'll see later, that presents a systematic view of phenomena. So it structures your research by specifying relations among variables. So it's a theory that you are going to use, or theories that you are going to use in your research, show the relationships among the variables that you are going to use in your research with the purpose of explaining and predicting phenomena. And this is the objective of research. Why you are doing research? Because you want to explain or predict a given phenomenon. So that's why this definition, I find it that it is to the point. It is a very, very well stated and formulated definition. And Ty, Burks, and Francis in 2019 said that theories are verbal representations of reality. We talked about reality. Research is about studying a given reality. It is very important for novice researchers to understand the concepts of reality. I'm not going to embark on this now because this is not the objective of today's session, but the idea of reality is very, very central to research. So theories are verbal representations of reality. If I am going to study a reality, the theory kind of verbally represents this reality that I'm going to try to study. So what is the role of theory in research? Generally speaking, I'm going to focus on 4 elements. Let's say that theory provides a framework for research. If you don't have a theory, well, of course, we're going to see this. You're not always going to start with a theory, but theories structure your research. They provide a framework or a structure for your research. And if they provide a framework for your research, kind of provide you with safety. When you are doing research, you are safe because you have a framework, you have a structure. They help you generate questions and hypotheses. And if you have no questions, you have no research. If you have no hypotheses, you have no research. Of course, sometimes in some research, you may not have hypotheses. You may have assumptions, or you may just have research questions, but you cannot do without research questions. So research questions can be generated through theories. Theories help define variables and determine relationships between variables, and we have seen this. And we are going to see examples. They help you guide, they help you interpret your data. They guide data interpretations. So when you are interpreting your data, discussing your data, the data that you have collected and analyzed during the discussion, during the interpretation, you cannot interpret data if you have no theories. So what theory to choose? This is a very, very important question. How can I choose the theory for my research? There are 3 criteria for choosing a theory in research. The first one is appropriateness. And researchers have to be very, very careful with this. You have to choose the theory that is appropriate to your research. You cannot choose any theory. Why I'm saying this? Because a lot of time, novice researchers, students sometimes, they fall in love with the theory and they want to use it no matter what. Well, this is not possible. Simply, it is possible. I mean, you can do it, but it won't be relevant. It is not relevant. So you have to find the theory that is appropriate to your research. It's up to you to decide. Of course, based on the questions you have, based on the concept that you want to study, based on the hypothesis that you want to make and you want to investigate. That's how you are going to decide whether a theory is appropriate or not. The second criteria is the ease of application. The theory that you are going to use should be easy to apply to your research and to your phenomenon, to the phenomenon that you are studying. That's the second criteria. The third is explanatory power. A theory that has explanatory power, that is to say, it explains or powerfully explains the phenomenon at hand. That's a theory that you want to choose. If a theory does not explain what you are trying to study, then that's not an appropriate theory. Of course, these criteria are related. And of course, some of you who wants to dig deep or delve into understanding further the issue of choosing theories can read about Karl Popper or falsification. That's another issue, but it is a very, very important issue when it comes to the good theories or theories that are not good or theories that are good to use in research. So Karl Popper is a very good reference. Now, we move on to the examples of theories and how they guide us, develop our research concepts, or formulate our hypotheses and research questions, and so on and so forth. So the first example that I'm going to use is self-determination theory. And well, I chose a very, very simple definition of self-determination theory that was developed by Ditchy and Ryan in 1985 and later developed in 2000. And there are many articles by both researchers, both scholars, Ditchy and Ryan, on self-determination theory. I chose this theory because it is widely used in education today, especially in motivation, the field of study that I am interested in, social psychology of education, uses self-determination theory, one of the theories that are used. So people, this theory purports that people become self-determined when their needs for competence, connection, and autonomy are fulfilled. Well, in this definition, what we see is that there are concepts. And the concept that we have here is self-determination. So if I want to do research in whether students are self-determined, that is to say motivated, they have the self-determination to study and perform and achieve results or achieve learning, I may use this theory because it explains this self-determination to me by using these concepts: competence, connection, and autonomy. So there is need for these three elements in order to achieve self-determination. So it explains it in this way. So we may say that this is kind of a conceptual framework using self-determination theory. A lot of students, again, have problems defining what a conceptual framework is or what a theoretical framework is. But this is an example. If this theory purports that self-determination is based on competence, connection, and autonomy, if these needs are fulfilled, self-determination exists, what it says is that these elements here, the three elements here, autonomy, competence, relatedness, experience leads to experiences of volition, motivation, and engagement. So students who feel that they are autonomous, that they are competent, that they relate to what they are studying, they experience volition, they experience motivation, they experience engagement. And those three elements here foster enhanced performance, persistence, and creativity. So if you want me to develop further how this theory can help you develop research in this field, so if I want to study, for example, students' performance, if I want to study students' persistence, if I want to study students' creativity, I can use this theory, self-determination theory. Why? Because it explains these elements for me, how through this conceptual framework or this theoretical framework. So through these relationships, these are the relationships between the variables that we talked about. That's how a theory explains relationships between variables. You see it here. So this relates to this, this leads to this. These three elements, experience leads to experience of these three elements here, which leads to enhanced performance, persistence, and creativity. And we're going to see an example of a hypothesis. A second example that I use in this, let's say, lesson or course is game theory. One of the theories that have been used widely in many fields now. I'm using it today for a reason. I will explain the reason later. But some students, doctoral students or researchers in education or in other fields in social sciences can use game theory, which has been used widely in the last few years. Well, game theory is about what? It explains decision making, yes, and explains decision making on the basis of a human being's behavior, on other people's behavior. That is to say, if I want to make decisions, I base my decisions on other people's behavior. We'll say this later. So one hypothesis using, for example, game theory is that a person C here will choose to cooperate or not cooperate. So make a decision to cooperate or not cooperate, either with another person or with a group of people, based on her or his rational analysis of the costs and the benefits which may be mediated by their experience. So if I see that the cost is beneficial to me, I may cooperate. If I see that the cost is not beneficial, I may not cooperate. But it is not as simple as it sounds, because as I said, I don't have time. We have 20 minutes. I don't have time to explain game theory in details. But for those of you who want to maybe dig deep into it and see how game theory might be applied to education or social science, you have plenty of articles there. For the first theory that I used, one hypothesis can be students' engagement gets higher as they feel that they have control over their learning, that they are competent, and that they belong within the learning community. So this hypothesis is based on the self-determination theory that I had just explained. That shows you how it is easy, well, it becomes easy as students understand the role of theory in research, and as students choose the appropriate theory to use, or as researchers choose the relevant theory to use, and they understand how this theory explains the relationship between the constructs that they want to study, it becomes easier for them to formulate hypotheses and then formulate research questions, or formulate research questions and then formulate hypotheses. Well, you know that it is very important for those of you who are novice to research, or we all know that there is a very, very tight link and relationship between research questions, first research objectives, research questions, research hypotheses. They are linked. If you are doing one research, your research objectives kind of mirror your research questions. Your research questions reflect your hypothesis, and the three are interrelated. If they do not match, if they are not aligned, it means that there is a problem. And we may have more questions about this later if you are interested in knowing why there might be a problem. Now we move on to the next part, or the second objective of this session, which is explaining the difference between grand versus grounded theory. Because at the beginning I said the role of theory is very important and we have to have a theory. But then I said, if you remember, that it's not always the case. I mean, researchers do not always start with a theory. Why? Because, well, that doesn't mean that theory is not important. Why? Because you have to have a theory at a given moment in your research, whether towards the end or in the middle or towards the beginning. Theory should exist, should be present. If it's not present, it means that there is a problem with your research. Now, what I have just explained is grand theory, of course. When we start with research objectives, research questions, hypotheses, and we collect data and we analyze the data and we get the results and we interpret these results, well, you know that this is the deductive approach, what we call the deductive approach. So that's what grand theory is about. So grand theory is mostly deductive. It is top-down, maybe bottom-up, it depends. So the most important part or objective of this grand theory research is to verify and refine theory. We have a theory, we use it, we generate hypotheses, we generate research questions. We want to verify this theory. Of course, we are not going to prove it's wrong, but we are going to say that what we have come up with as results do not match the theory. So there is something else we need to do. Maybe we need to gather more data, analyze further, and maybe find more elements that are not present in the theory that we have used. So that's what we mean by refining theory. But when it comes to grand theory, it uses hypotheses, and in this way it is constrained. Why is it constrained? Because you cannot go beyond the hypotheses, and that's why it is sometimes important to use grounded theory, not grand theory, and we'll see why. So it is highly structured, because if you have a theory, you start with a theory. This theory guides your research. You formulate hypotheses, research questions based on the theory that you have used, or the theories you have used. So your research is highly structured. And if research is highly structured, of course, it is very, very helpful in generalizing the results and so on and so forth. But it is still limited. It is highly structured. That is to say, there is a framework, but it is constrained. So you cannot go beyond the hypotheses. Well, that's what's led Glaser and Strauss, not in 2009, of course, in the 60s, yes, or at the end of the 50s. I don't remember the dates, maybe 1957, or the beginning of the 60s. They have developed grounded theory, what we call grounded theory. So what is grounded theory? It is the discovery of theory from data systematically obtained from social research. It is the discovery of theory from data systematically obtained from social research. What is different here? What is different is that when we talk about grand theory, we said that we start with a theory, and then we move on to creating objectives, formulating hypotheses, generating research questions, formulating hypotheses, collecting data, of course, through strategies, and then analyzing the data, and then comparing the data that we have to the theory. Here, with grounded theory, it is the discovery of theory from data. So it is the data that leads us to the theory, not vice versa, but systematically obtained from social research, because of course social research has been using grounded theory most often. Okay, it's not like what we call hard sciences. Now, grounded theory, unlike grand theory, is mostly inductive, and it is abductive also. It goes through analyzing data during data collection. This is a concept that is purely related to grounded theory. That is to say, an important thing is that data analysis takes place during data collection. In grand theory, you cannot analyze data as you are collecting it. In grounded theory, what you do is that you are analyzing your data as you are collecting it. Data analysis takes place during data collection. It is not restricted to hypotheses, because you are not going to use hypotheses. You may use assumptions. You may assume a number of propositions about the topic that you are studying, but it is not restricted to hypotheses. You are not going to use any hypotheses. You're going to use some research questions that are general, that are open, that are not closed, let's say, but you are not going to use hypotheses that are formulated and structured. It focuses on theory building compared to grand theory, which focuses on verifying theory and refining theory. So this grounded theory research focuses on theory building. Now, an example of using grounded theory, a very, very quick example. If you want to study, for example, if people nowadays everybody is talking about online learning, whether online learning is beneficial to students or not. Maybe we don't have enough data about that in some countries. Let's say in Morocco or in Qatar or in Kuwait or in one of the Arab and Islamic countries, we don't have data about that. What we might do is that we might go and ask people who are concerned. Of course, when it comes to learning, concerned people are students, are educators, teachers, and others, the stakeholders. So we go ask them questions. We ask them open-ended questions. We are not going to ask them closed questions or structured, highly structured questions, because that's what grounded theory is about. We're going to ask them open-ended questions about whether this online learning is motivating, is beneficial to them, whether it helps them learn or not. But it depends on the question. So you may have a very, very specific question about online learning. So you're not going to use a theory, but you're going to ask as many people as you can. And as you go asking people from one person A to person B to person C, what you do is that you start comparing data. And that's one of the first criterion in grounded theory, or the main concept, one of the main concepts, is constant comparison of data to data. So you are going to compare data of person A to data of person B to person C's data, and so on and so forth. And as you go on collecting data, you do what? You build concepts. We're going to see examples of this. So you're going to build concepts. That is to say, if you're studying online learning, people are going to tell you, for example, okay, when I'm studying on my own, I am behind the screen, I develop more autonomy and more control over, I'm just talking from the top of my mind, you see, I develop more control over my learning, and I become more autonomous. So here you are hearing ideas, and as you hear ideas, you develop concepts. So one concept you might develop and relate to online learning is autonomy or control over learning. So you develop concepts, you get in data, you're comparing data to data, then you develop concepts. And as you develop concepts, that's why we said that you are analyzing your data as you are gathering it in grounded theory. And as you develop concepts, you compare them to other concepts. And then you start building categories. And as you build categories, of course, you are going towards building theory. That's what you're trying to do. So the focus here is on the process. And between brackets, concepts are temporary because you compare concepts to concepts. As you compare concepts to concepts, you may get rid of some concepts. As some concepts become major or more important, you are going to get rid of some concepts. So concepts are temporary. So the focus is on the process, not on the results, on the data that you have collected or on the product. Tracking deviant cases is very important here. What we mean by deviant cases, you may have the norm. As you gather data, you may have a norm. So you may have people are answering questions in a given norm. But sometimes you may have people who deviate. You may have some data or some cases that deviate from the norm. These deviant cases, what we call deviant cases in grounded research, are very, very important because they explain the issue at length. They may help you explain some issues. So you should keep track of them. You shouldn't lose sight of them. They are very important. And as you collect data, you write what we call memos, what Glaser and Strauss call memos. You write memos about the data. It's not coding. In grand theory, what is important is coding your data after you collect it. But in grounded theory, during data collection, you need to write memos about what people are saying, what people are stating, and the concept that you are developing. So you write memos at the same time.
Dr. Abdelaziz, 5 minutes?
Yes, I think time is over, yes?
5 minutes.
Great. So one example very quickly of the concept that we talked about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We may think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as, I'm not saying that it was built this way, but it's just an example. An example is that maybe Maslow was trying to understand what motivates people. So if I want to understand what motivates students in a classroom, I'm going to ask them, what makes you perform better? Why aren't you performing well today? Someone is going to tell me, well, because I didn't have breakfast. This is a very, very down-to-earth, simple example, yes? So, I haven't had breakfast. Or, well, I am thirsty. I feel thirsty. I'm not so motivated today. So then I'm going to develop a concept. Okay, there is an important concept here about biological needs. So I may put them at the first layer. And then some people are going to tell me, yeah, okay, I have had breakfast and I'm fine. But I don't feel safe. You know, I don't feel secure in this classroom. So I'm going to develop the concept of security, and so on and so forth. So that gives you an example about what is meant by developing concepts from data using grounded theory. As I said, we have very limited time. That's why we're not digging deep into the details, but of course we can interact later, and we can you can even send questions later through emails, no problem. So one element in doing research, and that is related to theory, is what we call theoretical triangulation. We know the issue of triangulation is very important to triangulate data, and there are types of triangulation. We have data triangulation, we have investigator triangulation, we have methodological triangulation, but we do have what we call theoretical triangulation. And what is it? It is the use of multiple theories or hypotheses when examining a situation or phenomenon. The idea is to look at a situation, phenomenon from different perspectives, through different lenses, with different questions in mind. The different theories or hypotheses do not have to be similar or compatible. In fact, the more divergent they are, the more likely they are to identify different issues and or concerns. And that's a theoretical triangulation can be even used at the discussion level. When students are discussing their results, they can use many theories to explain or interpret their results. And that's part of what we call theoretical triangulation. And well, there are some rules of thumb that I want you to keep in mind, that I want myself to keep in mind too. They are very important for doing research. The first one is do not under-theorize. What is do not under-theorize? Some students, some researchers, doctoral students sometimes use the theory at the level of when they are explaining the objective of their research, and they forget about theory and they stop. So that's under-theorizing. Theory should be present at all levels of your research. At the, let's say, the introduction level, where you are, when you are introducing your objectives and research questions and explaining your framework, and at the methodological level, and at the when you are collecting data, it's very important to keep in mind that you are using a theory or theories. And at the discussion level and at the interpretation level, the role of theory is very important. So you don't want to under theorize. Be open to other disciplines. Now, game theory that I talked about was developed by who? It was developed by a mathematician. It was developed in maths. But people started using it in other disciplines. That's what we mean by be open to other disciplines. You cannot limit yourself to the discipline you're studying. This is very limiting. So be open to other disciplines. The third rule of thumb is be ready to challenge the validity of theories. Theories should not be taken for granted. I mean, it's not because you are using a theory that you are going to fall in love with this theory. And if your data does not match what the theory says, you are going to die. No, that's not it. So be ready to challenge the validity of theories. It's very, very important in research to be ready to validate, to challenge the validity of theories. So what happens when your hypotheses are not met, when your hypotheses are not confirmed? What happens? That's the best of things that can happen to you in research. Some students get disappointed. No, don't get disappointed. It is very important when your hypotheses are not confirmed to dig deep and analyze and find concepts and try to develop further research. And well, just one more thing, takeaways. I don't want you to go without takeaways. So the first takeaway is theory is at the heart of research. The second is learn how different theories explain the issue at hand. So when you are doing research, when we said that don't put first things first. At the level of developing the research objectives, you should know about the theories that explain the concept that you are studying, not later. There are a lot of students who build questionnaires, collect data, and come and tell me, which theory should I use? Well, that's a problem. You haven't put first things first. You are putting the horse before the cart, and that's not helpful. The third one is align your research questions, research hypotheses with your objectives and your theoretical concepts of framework. We have already talked about this. Make informed moves. Research is about making informed moves. It's like playing chess. You know which move you need to take first, which move you should make second, and so on and so forth. And the last one is consult experienced researchers. Thank you very much for this meeting, and I hope that it has been very helpful. If you wish to get the references or ask about more questions about what I have just presented, you can write me to my email.
شكرا دكتور. شكرا دكتور يعطيك العافية. We will share the slides and the recorded session with all the participants. Just to summarize what you shared, especially the practical tips, I'll not go through them, but before we take the questions and reflections from the participants, I want also to share what I went through as a PhD student and as a even researcher now, and also as a master student. And I would challenge some of the points you shared, Doctor, but also will share things that I went through, and hopefully يعني, the current researchers will not go through it, especially for the PhD level. Number one, by the way, I use grounded theory in my PhD, and I like the metaphor you used with Maslow's needs. So it's really a great metaphor to help understand the grounded theory. So the first point I want to share here, when you said, don't but, sorry, not that point, encouraging the researcher to see the full picture, the research onion graph that you shared. يعني احنا نشوف الفول بيكتشر لما نوصل النهاية أو قريب النهاية. فما هي الحلول أو التولز that will allow researchers إنهم يشوفون البيج بيكتشر قبل خط النهاية؟ هذا السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني، البيست براكتسز، الثيوريز كلها يعني أغلبها developed في الويست in a different context than الدول العربية والجلف region هني. ف how to select and يعني use a different theory that has been designed, implemented, created in a different context. In my case, at the end, يعني, my supervisor said, "This is Asmaa's theory." You know, I used theories from business sector, from healthcare, from education. بس في النهاية قال لي create your own. So how to support learning from other sectors and other contexts. And the last point دكتور, يعني احنا لما نستخدم الثيوري ك conceptual framework حق framing the questions, the data collection, بس في النهاية بعد بنستخدمها حق الداتا analysis. مثل ما قلت إنه يعني we like a specific one, we stick to it, and صعب إن إحنا نتخلى عنها. فأنا شلون أجنب طالب الباحث إنه لما يبذل كل هاي المجهود في النهاية وقت الداتا analysis بيكون يعني he needs to revise or work on another theory. I selected these points because I'm sure it's relevant to other students as well. So if we can answer this briefly, then Dr. Ibrahim will lead the next question.
Okay, thank you. Questions, very, very important questions. The first one, how to see the biggest picture. I guess the most important solution is training. I guess the problem with when it comes, for example, to our case, what I have been experiencing in Morocco is that a lot of times we don't train doctoral students before they become doctoral students. So I guess that the first thing is to train students during the master or even before on how to do research and how to see the biggest picture. And I think that there are two issues. The first one is that the people who need to train others to see the biggest picture themselves, they should know what the biggest picture is about. That's number one. The second thing is facilitate understanding through giving examples. Because when you see the biggest picture, when you hear the words like philosophy, research philosophy, research strategies, multi-methods, mixed methods, and so on and so forth, these are concepts that might sound a little bit challenging, but trainers should find ways to make them easier to understand. So that's the first thing, because you cannot do it otherwise, because as you said, it will take time for doctoral researchers to see the biggest picture, and they may see the biggest picture at the end. So the only way maybe that is there is training before becoming doctoral students. The second question, how to select and use a theory. Well, there are two issues. The first one is that a lot of times supervisors do not encourage novice researchers or doctoral students to find their own theories. That's the first issue. So we should encourage, because a lot of times I hear that using grounded theory is not for novice researchers. Why not? I mean, if this novice researcher has been accompanied and mentored and supervised in the right way, they may themselves use grounded theory and find the theory for themselves. We need to encourage them in the Arab world or in the Islamic world at our level. We need to encourage these novice researchers to use even grounded theory. That's number one. Number two, we need to call upon experienced researchers in the Arab world and in our context to use grounded theory research to find theories that are appropriate for our context. That's why when we want to do research, what we do is that we always opt for theories that have been developed in the West or theories that have been developed in the Americas. Yes, because our researchers, the experienced one, rarely use a grounded theory, rarely focus on qualitative research. And qualitative research helps us come up with new theories that are kind of appropriate to our context. The third question is, how can you make students or doctoral students to get rid? It's not about getting rid of that theory that has been using, but it's just about developing feelings for that theory. Because if you as a, let's say as a professor or as a supervisor, or as a trainer, you are so attached to a theory and you show it to your supervisee, that supervisee may develop feelings for that theory. So if they develop feelings for that theory and then later they find out that, aha, that theory does not explain the phenomenon that I'm studying, they may get frustrated and disappointed. But that's not the case. So that's why we have to say the obvious right away at the beginning. Say the obvious. The obvious is that theories are here to be challenged. Theories are not 100%, should not be taken for granted, as I said. Yes? So they have been developed in a given context. Yeah?
Right.
So that's what researchers, that's what doctoral students need to understand.
شكرا دكتور.
الحين بس نشوف منو اللي عنده أي سؤال أو مداخلة أو تعقيب أو كذلك عرض الإكسبيرينس. عندنا سؤال من رزان، تفضلي.
السلام عليكم، يعطيكم العافية.
هلا رزان.
Dr. Abdelaziz, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciated it. I wanted to take it kind of a step back and ask about biases. So when we are formulating a theory and then we begin collecting data, how do we make sure that we minimize the most common biases like confirmation bias and other types of biases? Do you have an idea of how we can address those in our research?
If you're talking about biases towards the theory that you are using, is that it? Can you hear me?
Razan?
Yeah, sorry, they muted me by mistake. Yeah. I'm talking more about the biases faced when choosing the data we're working with, rather than focusing just on the theory.
That's why I said at the beginning that it's important to put first things first. Yes. So the first thing that you want to do when you focus on a concept or phenomenon and you want to research this phenomenon is to try to understand how this phenomenon has been studied before you. What are the theories that have addressed this phenomenon? This helps you avoid the biases. That is to say, before I start studying this phenomenon myself, because what happens to all of us when you start studying something, what happens is that you have assumptions yourself. And that's how you develop these biases. That is to say, you have some assumptions and you believe in these assumptions, at least before collecting data. What you should do is, before you start developing this, not developing the assumptions because the assumptions are here, but before you start collecting your data using these assumptions, you need to understand how others have studied your research and your phenomenon. Are there any other theories that have been developed and that have studied this phenomenon? This will give you a clear idea of how this phenomenon has been studied, what elements you should focus on, what elements you should avoid, and so on and so forth, what elements haven't been touched upon, and so on and so forth. This helps you structure your research questions appropriately and use the appropriate strategies, because what is important about using a theory in research, and that's why we say that it is better for novice researchers to use grand theory at least, because grand theory makes them structure their research. A theory will help you choose even the strategies that you are going to use to collect data. So that's at least understanding the theories that study the concept or the phenomenon will help you avoid these biases. That's what I think will help you.
Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
في أستاذ إبراهيم مصطفى عنده سؤال. تفضل أستاذ إبراهيم.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
السلام.
طبعا أتمنى إنه ما في مشكلة، حأتكلم بالعربي. تفضل اتكلم بالعربي. إبراهيم مصطفى، طالب ماجستير علم الاجتماع والأنثروبولوجيا في معهد الدوحة. شاكر للأستاذ عبد العزيز على المحاضرة القيمة اللي هي بجد يعني كانت ثرية، وكان في يعني تمرحل كويس، وكان في يعني حتى الانتقال كان انتقال سلس إلى حد ما. وبغرض إسراء النقاش أنا بحاول قدر الإمكان أشوف الحاجات اللي كانت من وجهة نظري محتاجة لتركيز. طيب أنا حبدأ مداخلتي انطلاقا من السؤال اللي طرحته دكتورة أسماء، اللي هو سؤال التوليف. كيف أنا أقدر كباحث يكون عندي ظاهرة معينة عايز أدرسها، كيف أنا أقدر أخلق توليفة نظرية. طيب فكرة التوليفة أصلا جاية من وين؟ جاية من إنه نحن لو انطلقنا من نظرية واحدة ولا من منظومة نظرية واحدة، نحن ما حنقدر نشوف الواقع. ده معناها شنو؟ ده معناها إنه الواقع أصلا هو معقد أكثر من إنه نظرية واحدة هي تقدر تستوعبه. طيب التحدي بيبقى وين؟ بيبقى في إنه كيف أنا كباحث أنتقل معرفيا من المرحلة بتاعت إنه أنا أكون one dimensional، يعني نظرية واحدة هي مسيطرة عليا وعندها علي سلطة أيديولوجية كده وبتاع، إلى موقف معرفي نقدي حر بيخليني أقدر أنا أفكك المفاهيم وأفكك النظريات وأفحصها معرفيا وأشوف القيمة المعرفية بتاعتها. أنا كنت بتمنى إنه المحاضرة يكون فيها جانب بيركز على البعد ده، إنه كيف الطالب يعني الطرائق أو المنهجيات اللي ممكن يشتغل بها الطالب في تفكيك المفهوم، في فحص القيمة المعرفية للمفهوم، في كيف إنه ينطلق من الواقع عشان يقدر يفحص مفهوم، وكيف إنه ينطلق من المفهوم ذاته لما يجي للواقع ذاته ويكون بياته حساسيات وبياته sensibilities هو يعني كده. لكن هي المحاضرة غيمة جدا يعني. بعد ذاك النقطة الثانية اللي هو البعد الفلسفي، أنا كنت أتمنى إنه يكون في تركيز على يعني الانتقال من الجراند ثيوريز للجراوندد، هو انتقال فلسفي عنده جانب فلسفي معرفي، إنه نحن لما ننتقل من الجراند ثيوريز من القصص الكبرى والسرديات الكبرى زي ما بيقولوا ما بعد حداثيين، هو يعني انتقال من فلسفة علمية كان بتفترض إنه العالم ده it can be captured، إنه ممكن نحن نقدر نحتويه في مفاهيم وفي مقولات وفي نظريات، ومحتاجين بس نحن كلنا نعمله نسترشد بها لما نجي نعاين للواقع الجزئي ولحالاتنا نحن الاجتماعية والثقافية. فحصل يعني الانتقال هو انتقال نتيجة لأزمة معرفية في عدم قدرة تلك السرديات الكبرى على يعني تمليكنا ادوات لفهم الواقع، فوجدنا في جاب معرفي كبير جدا. قالوا hold on a minute، خلونا نحن ننزل.
استاذ ابراهيم اذا ممكن بس تختصر عشان نترك المجال للاجابه الاستاذ دكتور عبد العزيز، واذا في احد بعد عنده سؤال اسفين.
تمام اوكي. عموما اختصر فيها انه نحن في المجتمعات العربيه الاسلاميه وخصوصا في جامعاتنا محتاجين نملك طلابنا بدلا أن نطرح سؤال كيف اسمه شنو، هل نولف أو ما نولف ولا شنو، نطرح سؤال كيف نولف، كيف نحاكم معرفيا، كيف نقيم نظرية، كيف نقيم مفهوم. وشكرا.
شكرا سيد إبراهيم، يعني مداخلة قيمة جد قيمة يعني. أنا أحاول أجاوب بالإنجليزي إذا ما في مشكل يعني. First, what you said about all the issues you have mentioned are very, very important actually, but they are not the objective of this session. So if you want to get into these things that we have talked about, there is a session that I have given to Alexandria University that is already recorded in their Facebook page, YouTube, I guess YouTube channel, that talks about what you have mentioned, the philosophical approaches, or what we call the paradigm shifts. That's what you are talking about. So you're talking about shifting paradigms and how these paradigms are related to reality. علاقة الواقع بالبعد الفلسفي. يعني كاينة محاضرة أنا أعطيتها لجامعة الإسكندرية، الهدف منها هو يعني الربط ما بين الحقيقة الواقع الذي ندرسه، يعني the reality that we are studying, even if I've already mentioned that in this session. So the reality that we are studying and the relationship between the reality and the paradigms or the philosophical approaches, that's a different issue. We have just tried here today to explain the importance of theory in research, because a lot of students don't see this. A lot of doctoral students do not really see this, and I am aware of this because I've been teaching research methodology for years, and I know that this is a huge issue. But when it comes to choosing the theory, we have talked about, I haven't said that we should focus on one theory, because I have already mentioned what we call theoretical triangulation. And you are right that sometimes the one theory is not enough to explain one complex phenomenon. And that's not what we said. We didn't say that students should focus on one theory, and but you are right, yes. So as I said, there is another session with Alexandria University. Or if you want me, I can send you the session if you want. I can send you the course, and it explains the relationship between the philosophical relationship between reality and research paradigms or research philosophies. But that is also a very, very important issue.
في أحد بعد عنده سؤال بس علشان قبل لا نختم؟ إذا ما في أحد عنده سؤال نعطي الختام.
في سؤال على الخاص انبعث هني. How can I define my thesis framework?
Well, if you're talking about the theoretical framework, yes. So the theoretical framework, it is the theory that you are going to use, or the theories that you are going to use, that are going to help you define your theoretical framework. Of course, we make a difference between theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. Yes, the difference is not big, but I'm sorry, but someone is requesting remote control of my screen. Okay, as I said that there is a difference, but not a huge difference. So they are related, of course. A theoretical framework is defined by the theory you are using, as I have explained with self-determination theory. Self-determination theory explains the main concepts and how they are related. So the relationship between the concepts is your theoretical framework, and the practical relationship, that is to say how let's say variable A, which is an independent variable or an independent variable, affects variable B, which is an independent variable. Of course, here we are not saying again that there is one dependent variable, one independent variable, but just explaining things. Yes. So the explanation of the relationship is your conceptual framework. That explanation, how one leads to B, how A leads to B, is your conceptual framework.
شكرا دكتور عبد العزيز، واعتقد ان احنا وصلنا دكتوره الى ختام اللقاء.
بس حابه انهي بالنقطه اللي الاخ ذكرها من شوي بخصوص العلاقه بين الريسيرش بارادايم والريسيرش ثيوري والريسيرش ميثودز والريسيرش methodology. I remember my first class and I did my second master in research methods in Cambridge, and I remember that class was so confusing, but don't worry, confusion is part of the process.
Exactly.
The more you do research, هذه العلاقة بين الريسيرش بارادايم والريسيرش theories بتكون واضحة لما أنت تكون في البحث rather than قاعد في lecture وتسمع أو تقرأ كتاب. I wish we have more time to discuss this really important point, a confusing point. I mean, at least talking about my experience. بس في النهاية يعني ساعدت إن الباحث يشوف الفول بيكتشر. Again دكتور يعطيك العافية، دكتور إبراهيم يعطيك العافية، وشكرا على all the participants، وإن شاء الله بنبعث لكم البرزنتيشن والريكوردد سيشن، وبيكون عندنا آخر محاضرتين الأسبوع الجاي والأسبوع اللي بعده. شكرا.